Well, hello, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Coffee with Stephen. So, this week's blog is entitled Neo-Fascists. And I was torn, I'm going to be honest with you. I was really torn on this one. I had two sort of compelling things to talk about. One had to do with President Biden's speech in front of Independence Hall a couple of weeks ago that I really wanted to tackle when it first came out, but I wanted to do the blog about Cheney's Ring Weekend. I thought that was more appropriate, and since it had just recently happened, I felt compelled to write about that. But in the back of my mind, I really wanted to focus or at least give some attention to that speech. And that's what this blog is frankly about. Now, immediately following writing this blog, we suffered the loss of Queen Elizabeth. And I feel that that's another one that's important to write about. I'm going to probably be doing that in the next blog, unless something unbelievably catastrophic happens in the universe between now and then. But I do want to tease it a little bit. A lot of people in the United States have been negative about the monarchy through most of my life. Essentially an argument that the revolution was somehow a repudiation and rejection of the British monarchy. I'm not entirely sure that that's an accurate statement. There is definitely something that's unique to the American culture that finds the idea of hereditary accession to be antagonistic towards our ideals of self-independence. But there is a unique quality about the monarchy, not just the British monarchy, frankly, but monarchies in general, that have an interesting sort of moral anchor to a universe. We call them national cheerleaders, for lack of a better term. But in any event, we'll talk about that next week. This blog, I think, is candidly probably a little bit more important. For years, I would hear people talk about fascism. And fascism was always oriented towards sort of right of center political leanings, right? If you were a Republican and you were being chastised for being a Republican by a Democrat, then there raised the specter of possibly being referred to as a fascist. And this has always sort of had a cognitive dissonance to me, because fascism and the unique independence and love of freedom with the feel of a sort of an anti-regulation agenda is literally the exact opposite of fascism. On the other hand, centralized control and essentially the desire to decimate any sort of political opponents and to essentially coalesce around a single party state is somewhat of the definition of fascism. On top of everything else, the idea that you would specifically target a group of individuals as potentially having an existential threat to the state is somewhat of a definition of fascism. Now, the pageantry of fascism notwithstanding, that's not necessary for a fascist state to exist. Pardon me. And yet, it's really helpful if what you're trying to do is elevate the state to effectively like a religious level. I don't think that there's any argument that the spectacle that we saw in front of Independence Hall with the red background and the Marines and Joe Biden looking like he was channeling Mussolini is not, at the very least, evoke imagery of fascism. But when we start to get deeper into the weeds, we can see that the left has really become the new fascists. And the fact that they are effectively using that term in a pejorative sense to go after their political opponents, I think sort of bespeaks to their own insecurity and frankly, their own realization that they have become, in fact, the neo-fascists. Anyways, I read the blog, disagree with it, while there's still some degree of freedom left in the United States, you are free to do so. Obviously, comment on the blog if you can. Do subscribe to this channel if at all possible. And Carolyn always admonishes me to remind you to do that. Definitely read the blog on Wednesday morning at artemishq.com. As always, I want you to train constantly, train consistently, train repetitively, and train with purpose. Above all else, stay safe.